What if the reason you feel everything so intensely isn't because you were born different, but because life shaped you over years you barely remember? What if your empathy didn't come solely from kindness, but from surviving through repeated experiences and silent learning? People shaped by trauma don't just understand others. They learn to read them accurately. They grow up in environments where emotional signals matter more than words, where a slight shift in tone can change everything, and where safety depends on predicting what happens next. This isn't just a fantasy, it's conditioning. Neuroscience shows that being repeatedly exposed to emotional unpredictability wires the brain to stay alert, especially in the amygdala and limbic system, which are responsible for detecting threats and processing emotions. Over time, this creates a state of constant awareness that feels normal because it has always been there. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." But how can you choose differently when what has happened deeply influences how you feel, think, and react? You don't remember when you became this aware. You don't recall making the choice to read people so carefully. It just became second nature. That's the illusion that keeps the cycle going. What feels natural is often something your mind built slowly to protect you from what you once couldn't control. The truth is that trauma-related empathy hides a heavy burden behind its appealing facade. Externally, it looks like emotional intelligence, intuition, and deep connection. People admire it. They describe you as understanding, wise, and easy to talk to. They feel safe around you without knowing why. But inside, it feels very different. It feels like your mind never truly rests. There's always a background process running, scanning, interpreting, and analyzing. Even in calm moments, you're not fully at ease. You stay attentive, observing, and measuring subtle changes. This constant awareness creates a quiet, persistent fatigue. It's not dramatic enough to explain, but strong enough to feel. It also brings a kind of loneliness that's hard to describe. You're not physically alone, but your inner experience is so layered that most interactions feel shallow. You could be in a busy restaurant in New York or a quiet cafe in Toronto, surrounded by chatter, laughter, and movement, yet feel like you're the only one noticing what's really happening beneath the surface. You sense hesitation in voices, forced smiles, hidden tensions between people, and emotional currents no one acknowledges. Over time, this creates a gap. You understand people deeply, but you rarely feel understood in return. That gap turns into a silent question that follows you everywhere. If I can feel everyone so clearly, why does no one seem to feel me back the same way? Repeated often enough, that question begins to shape how you perceive yourself. Beneath this experience are patterns that psychology now understands better than ever. Your brain adjusted to your surroundings with precision. Research shows that children exposed to inconsistent emotional environments develop hyperattunement, meaning they become highly sensitive to small signals like facial expressions, tone variations, body language, and emotional inconsistencies. In the beginning, this isn't a personality trait. It's a survival mechanism. The problem is that once the brain learns this pattern, it doesn't automatically change when the environment does. It continues scanning even when there's no immediate threat. This leads to emotional absorption, where you don't just notice feelings, you internalize them. Studies on mirror neurons suggest that your brain simulates the emotional state of others, explaining why you physically feel what they are experiencing. Someone's anxiety can become your restlessness. Their sadness can weigh in your chest, and their anger can tighten your muscles. Over time, this creates emotional saturation, where your nervous system is overwhelmed with input. Then comes identity fusion, where your sense of self-worth becomes tied to being the one who understands and supports others. You start to believe your value lies in how much you give, how much you tolerate, and how much you can bear. Because of this belief, you linger longer in draining situations. You neglect your own needs, putting others first automatically. At the same time, another pattern emerges: withdrawal. No matter how much you crave connection, excessive emotional input overwhelms your system. So, you retreat and isolate. You seek solitude not because you're indifferent, but because it's the only place your nervous system can reset. This creates an inner conflict between connection and distance, closeness and escape, understanding and exhaustion. You see these patterns play out in everyday life in ways others often overlook, but for you, they feel intense and real. You're texting someone late at night after a long day, perhaps alone in your apartment, and their reply feels slightly off. Not wrong, just slightly different. Your mind holds on to it. You reread it multiple times, analyzing tone, punctuation, and timing. Try to uncover what changed, even when there might be nothing to find. In relationships, whether in Los Angeles, London, or Chicago, you sense emotional shifts before they're spoken. You notice distance before it becomes clear. You feel disconnection before it's acknowledged. This generates a constant underlying anxiety, not because something has happened, but because it feels like something might. At work, in meetings, you don't just hear what people say, you feel what they don't say. You quickly recognize stress, frustration, and insecurity, even when hidden behind professionalism. While others focus on tasks, you process the emotional environment. This ongoing processing drains you in ways difficult to explain to others. Even social events, gatherings, and casual meetups don't just take energy, they consume it. When you finally return home, sit in silence, and your surroundings become still, you feel the weight you carry. It's not just tiredness. It's accumulated emotional input. Feelings that were never yours yet somehow became a part of your internal state. This realization can be confusing because you didn't choose to take it on. It just happened. This is where psychology offers clarity that shifts your perspective entirely. Carl Jung believed the psyche adapts to survive, even if those adaptations later become limitations. What you call empathy may actually be trauma-induced hypervigilance, where your nervous system is conditioned to detect and respond to emotional cues automatically. Jung also introduced the idea of individuation, the process of separating learned behaviors from your true self. In simple words, it means recognizing that not everything you think, feel, or how you react is genuinely you. Some of it is learned. This is where awareness becomes powerful. When you realize your empathy was shaped by past experiences, you gain the ability to change how you engage with it. You learn that noticing emotions doesn't require absorbing them. Understanding someone doesn't mean carrying their emotional burden. Being aware doesn't make you responsible. Modern psychology also supports this with ideas like emotional boundaries and nervous system regulation. When you start asking simple questions like, "Is this mine?" you interrupt automatic patterns. You create space between stimulus and response. That space is where change begins. It may feel strange at first, even uncomfortable, because your system is used to responding immediately. But over time, that pause becomes natural. With it comes a sense of control you may have never felt before. This is where your story begins to change in subtle ways that become powerful over time. You start to realize your empathy was never the issue. It was the lack of boundaries around it that caused the pain. You see that you can still feel deeply without losing yourself in the process. You can care about others without taking on their emotions. You could be aware without feeling overwhelmed. This shift doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds in small moments. When you choose not to overanalyze a message, when you notice tension but don't internalize it, or when you allow someone to feel their emotions without trying to fix them. At first, it feels strange, almost like going against your nature. But gradually, something shifts. You feel lighter. Your mind feels quieter. Your body feels less tense. You experience moments of calm that were rare before. In those moments, you reconnect with yourself in a way you've been missing. You realize your sensitivity isn't something to eliminate, but something to guide with awareness. And perhaps that's the most important truth of all. you were never too sensitive. You were doing what you had to do to get by. Now you can see things in a way, and you have the power to make different choices. When you make these choices, you do not lose the ability to understand how other people feel. You just learn to handle your feelings about things like empathy in a better way. You finally get to be in charge of your empathy.